Get out of the car. Now. Two men in knockoff security uniforms boxed in my wife's sedan near the lake, their black SUV angled to block her front bumper. From a distance, they looked like cops. Up close, the badges were wrong, the radios were props, and the way they fanned out around her vehicle screamed ambush, not routine community check. Juliana had 3 seconds to choose. Cooperate and let herself be processed by men with zip ties on their belts, or fight. What she did next turned a harmless-sounding inspection into a fight for her life and ripped the mask off a criminal operation hiding inside our HOA. I'll get to that. But this didn't start at the lake. Started 3 weeks earlier, at a meeting that should have been boring. The Maplewood Estates clubhouse sat beside our lake like a glass showroom, its floor-to-ceiling windows mirroring the dark water that had sold families like mine on this upscale ranch development. That night, the perfect landscaping and soft uplighting felt less like comfort and more like camouflage. Inside the main conference room, neighbors drifted in with hushed conversations and tight shoulders. The air buzzed with a nervous energy no one could name yet, but everyone felt. Then Vivian Thornfield walked in and the room shifted. At 50, with steel-gray hair wound into a severe bun and a blazer that probably cost more than my first car, she moved like someone born to be obeyed. Her pleasant smile never reached her eyes. In 2 years as HOA chairwoman, she turned a cooperative board into her private fiefdom. She didn't enforce rules. She conjured them, digging up bylaws no one had ever seen to justify whatever power play she wanted that week. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice slicing through the chatter with practiced sharpness. "Tonight we're implementing critical security enhancements for our lake access areas." A PowerPoint slide lit up behind her. Stock photo officers in uniforms that looked disturbingly like real police. "Our new enhanced patrol program," she continued, "will ensure compliance with community standards through immediate intervention protocols." Bureaucratic nonsense that sounded official and said nothing. That was Vivian's specialty. Wrap raw power in corporate language and hope residents were too polite or intimidated to notice. 2 strangers stood near the screen, flanking her like bodyguards. One was heavy-set with darting eyes that never stopped scanning faces. The other held himself like ex-military. Ramrod straight, hands still, gaze watchful. No introductions. No explanation. Not residents, that was obvious. They weren't watching Vivian's slides. They were watching us. My wife raised her hand. Juliana Cross had the kind of calm confidence that comes from combat deployments and a law degree. When she spoke, Thornfield's rhythm faltered. "Excuse me," Juliana said. "This proposal lacks basic legal grounding. California Civil Code limits HOA enforcement authority. You cannot authorize personnel to conduct vehicle stops or compliance checks without explicit statutory backing." Her tone stayed professional, but she was cutting through Vivian's smokescreen like a scalpel. "And these uniforms," she added, nodding at the slide, "are designed to mimic law enforcement. That crosses dangerously close to Penal Code 538D, impersonating peace officers." Vivian's smile didn't budge, but something hard flickered behind her eyes. "Mrs. Cross," she said, her voice coated in condescension, "I appreciate your interpretation of the law. However, our legal counsel has fully vetted these protocols." She motioned to a closed folder she hadn't opened all night. "These security officers will operate in complete compliance with their commissioned authority. No facts, no credentials, just intimidation dressed as reassurance." The 2 unknown men exchanged a look. I caught the heavyset one lift his phone and, with a quick practiced motion, snap a photo of Juliana's license plate through the glass. My military background had trained me to spot surveillance tells. That one hit me like a siren. Real security doesn't build covert target lists at a neighborhood meeting. Juliana stayed on point. "Then I'd like to review their commission certificates and insurance documentation. Residents are entitled to verify the credentials of anyone enforcing rules here." Heads around the room nodded. Doubt was spreading. Vivian's jaw tightened. She wrote something in her leather portfolio with short, angry strokes, like she was adding Juliana's name to a list. While the meeting dragged on, something else caught my eye. The clubhouse security cameras, usually aimed to cover doors and general seating, had been subtly tilted. Now they were pointed squarely at the sections where outspoken residents typically sat. People like Juliana. It wasn't about safety. It was about tracking dissidents. When they weren't staring at us, the two strangers appeared to be listening to radio traffic that didn't match anything in the room. They weren't there to observe the meeting. They were building intelligence. Vivian closed the night with a declaration, not a vote. The enhanced patrol program will begin immediately, she said. Security is not negotiable. Those with nothing to hide should welcome increased oversight. The threat was wrapped in neighborly concern, but the message was clear. Cooperate or be marked as a problem. On our way back to the car, I could feel eyes on us from the clubhouse windows. That wasn't paranoia. That was experience. Juliana unlocked her door with steady hands, but I knew her mind was already mapping statutes, liabilities, and angles of attack. She'd seen enough. On the drive home, the lake slid past us like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the clubhouse lights in shattered lines. We'd moved here for that view. Within days, it would become a battlefield. Vivian's enhanced patrol was about to show its real purpose, and Juliana would be the first target. The harassment started exactly 72 hours after the meeting. Monday morning, Juliana found the first citation tucked under our windshield wiper. Heavy stock paper, HOA letterhead, legal-sounding nonsense, vehicle positioning NO and compliance. It read, "Our angle in the driveway allegedly violated subsection 12 of the community guidelines." They'd even listed a measurement, 14 degrees off optimal. The timestamp? 2:37 a.m. We'd been asleep. By Wednesday, 2 more citations appeared. One accused us of irrigation timing violations because our sprinklers supposedly ran during restricted hours, restrictions that did not exist in any document we'd ever seen. The other claimed unauthorized lake access for Juliana's morning jog on the public trail that every resident used freely. Each form was signed by a deputy security officer, a title our HOA had never had. Juliana laid the notices across the kitchen table like evidence. "Look at the detail," she said, tracing timestamps and measurements. "This isn't random enforcement. Someone is watching us around the clock." Her finger moved to the signature lines. Slight differences in handwriting. Multiple people using the same fake title. The citations referenced clauses that did not exist in our CC and RS. It was as if a shadow rulebook had been created just for us. The logo on the letterhead had morphed too, community iconography mixed with law enforcement symbols. The design blurred the line between HOA and government on purpose. The pattern was obvious. They were building a paper trail to justify whatever came next. Thursday afternoon, the harassment stepped from paper to pavement. A black patrol vehicle started cruising past our house with suspicious regularity. No HOA emblem, no company name, just generic community patrol decals anyone could print at a copy shop. I timed it. The SUV passed when Juliana left for work. Again when she came home for lunch. Again when she returned in the evening. Every time, the driver slowed, stared, and spoke into his radio. They wanted us to know we were under observation. Friday, Juliana spotted something in the mud below our kitchen window. Fresh boot prints. Heavy tread. Not running shoes. Not casual. Whoever had been there had stood long enough to sink deep into the soft earth, in the perfect spot to watch us eat breakfast. That was enough for Juliana. She went straight to the driveway, dropped to one knee behind her sedan, and swept her hand under the bumper. Her fingers closed around cold metal. A compact GPS tracker clung to the frame with a magnet. Not cheap, not top tier. Good enough for live tracking. Bad enough that no legitimate HOA had any business using it. She photographed everything, the device, the placement, the boot prints, with deliberate care. We were beyond complaints now. This was a case. "This isn't security," she said quietly. "This is an intelligence operation." We did a full sweep of the property. Our mailbox lock was scraped and scarred. Someone had tried to force it. The small camera covering our driveway had been carefully nudged off-angle, creating a perfect blind spot where the patrol SUV usually parked. Saturday confirmed we weren't imagining any of it. The same black vehicle cruised by 3 times in one afternoon, each pass synced to our movements. When Juliana knelt in the garden, it crawled by, the driver taking notes. When I walked to the mailbox, he lifted binoculars. Our home felt less like a house and more like an aquarium. Sunday night, while reviewing our own camera feeds, Juliana checked a shared clip from our neighbor's motion-activated system. There they were, 2 shadowy figures under our car at 3 a.m. on Thursday, working fast but not fast enough to avoid being recorded. Grainy or not, it was clear enough to prove criminal trespass, and that the tracker hadn't appeared by accident. We didn't know it yet, but those images, coupled with the citations and logs we'd kept, would become the spine of a case that would rip Vivian's program open. Her officers were done watching from the shadows. They were about to step into the light. Friday afternoon arrived dressed like a postcard. Blue sky, perfect temperatures, lake shining like polished steel. Exactly the kind of day the Maplewood brochure had sold us. Juliana had finished a morning of legal consults and decided to clear her head with a solo run on the Lakeside Trail. A 3-mile loop she'd done for 3 years without a second thought. This time, the unease ran ahead of her. The ambush point was chosen with precision. On the far side of the lake, the trail narrowed between the water and a dense stand of pines, forming a choke point. Visibility dropped. Escape options vanished. Far enough from the homes to discourage casual witnesses. Close enough to community property that a black SUV wouldn't look out of place. At 3:15 p.m., Juliana rounded the bend and saw it. The same style black SUV blocked the path. 2 men in dark uniforms stood beside it, feet braced, hands near their belts. They weren't there by accident. The taller one stepped forward, voice pitched in fake professionalism. "Ma'am, I need you to stop for a routine compliance check," he said. "I'm Colton Reed with HOA Security Services. This is my partner, Mason Drake. We're verifying lake use permits for all trail users today." Her instincts went hot. Up close, their gear told the real story. Badges with no numbers. Radios mounted wrong. Duty belts stocked with zip ties instead of cuffs. Their positions were textbook. Reed blocking her forward path, Drake drifting to her flank, cutting off retreat. Juliana kept her voice mild. "What specific authority do you have to detain residents on HOA property?" she asked. "I'm not aware of any lake use permits for this trail, and I've reviewed every current policy." Reed faltered half a beat. "These are new regulations under the Enhanced Patrol Program approved at the last meeting," he said, producing a clipboard. "We're required to verify compliance before allowing continued access to restricted areas." The forms on his board were dense with meaningless clauses about community safety and enhanced oversight, demanding personal data that had nothing to do with strolling around a lake. Juliana didn't bother reading beyond the headers. "I'm not required to surrender personal information to use a common area trail," she said, tone sharpening. "If you believe there's an actual violation, file it through the board. I'm continuing my run." She stepped to pass. Drake slid in front of her, the courtesy mask ripping away. "Ma'am, you need to cooperate with this investigation," he said flatly. His hand dipped toward an object on his belt that definitely wasn't HOA issued. "We've had reports of unauthorized activities. You're coming with us for additional questioning." That was no longer harassment. That was attempted abduction, wrapped in fake authority. Reed's fingers brushed the bundle of zip ties on his belt. The trap had sprung. Juliana's world narrowed to angles, distances, and timing. She saw a tight trail, an SUV blocking one end, trees on the other, 2 men set for a simple snatch and grab on a resident they expected to intimidate into compliance. They'd picked the wrong target. The instant Reed gripped the zip ties, Juliana shifted from compliant resident to combatant. "I am lawfully present on community property," she said, raising her phone. "I'm requesting immediate police assistance. You have no legal authority to detain me. This interaction is being recorded." But they were already committed. Drake lunged for her wrist, telegraphing his move a mile away. He was used to scared people, not trained resistance. She pivoted, letting his momentum carry him past her toward the water, his hand scraping empty air. Reed dropped the clipboard, fumbling for his sidearm, a modified airsoft pistol made to look like something a deputy might carry. To a layperson, it would have been convincing. To Juliana, the weight, balance, and markings screamed replica. "Drop the weapon," she commanded. He ignored her, desperate to get the gun pointed her direction, betting that fear of a barrel would shut her down. He bet wrong. She closed the gap in 2 strides, swept his weapon arm up with her left hand, and drove her right palm into his solar plexus. Air whooshed from his lungs. The fake pistol flipped from his fingers and splashed into the shallows. Behind her, metal snapped, the sound of a collapsible baton. She spun as Drake came in again, swinging wide for her shoulder. Big, intimidating arcs. Sloppy technique. Juliana ducked inside the swing, seized his wrist in both hands, and cranked his joint in a clean, efficient lock. Pain shot up his arm. The baton dropped into the dirt. Reed, still wheezing, lunged again, grabbing a fistful of her running jacket, trying to bull rush her toward the SUV. She sank her weight, turned her hips, and used his momentum against him, flipping him onto the gravel so hard his skin scraped but bones stayed intact. Drake tried a desperate tackle from her blind side. She felt him coming, stepped aside, and hooked his ankle. He hit the ground in a coughing heap. 45 seconds. That was all it took to flip the script. Now both men lay on the trail, winded, disarmed, and stunned that the soccer mom they'd been sent to snatch had just put them on the ground. Juliana scooped up their dropped zip ties and, in a quiet stroke of justice, used them to bind their wrists behind their backs with brisk, practiced efficiency. "You have the right to remain silent," she said as she cinched the plastic tight. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. You're going to need one for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and impersonating peace officers." Reed gasped, red-faced and panicked. "You don't know who you're messing with," he wheezed. "This comes from the top of your HOA. We're just doing our jobs." It was more than bluster. It was an admission. Drake tried damage control. "He doesn't know what he's talking about," he said quickly. "We were hired for legitimate security work." But his eyes kept darting toward the SUV and his buzzing phone. Someone else was supposed to be running this operation. Juliana had already dialed 911. "This is Juliana Cross at Maplewood Estates," she told the dispatcher, voice steady. "2 individuals attempted to detain me with fake law enforcement credentials and weapons on the Lakeside Trail. I defended myself and have them restrained. Please send law enforcement and medical for minor injuries." "Units are en route," the dispatcher said. "Stay on the line." 8 minutes. That was the ETA. Juliana chose a position with clear sightlines down the trail in both directions and kept both men in her peripheral vision. Ambushes sometimes came in layers. If these 2 had backup, it would show up soon. Reed's phone buzzed again beside him on the gravel. A preview text flashed on the screen. Status report. V needs confirmation of compliance. 1 letter, 1 sentence, and a line straight back to Vivian Thornfield. The sound of approaching engines reached Juliana before the vehicles appeared. Multiple, staggered, more like neighborhood traffic than a coordinated team. A family SUV rounded the bend first, followed by 2 joggers who'd clearly picked up the commotion. Tom and Sarah Fairmont were coming back from a picnic with their teenage daughter when they rolled into what looked like a low-budget crime scene. 2 men zip-tied on the ground, a woman holding a phone, gear scattered everywhere. Tom braked hard. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called, stepping out, scanning for threats with the reflexes he'd never quite lost from his own military logistics days. "Do we need to call the police?" "I'm already on with them," Juliana said, speaker still live for the dispatcher. In a few precise sentences, she laid out what had happened and asked the Fairmonts to stay as witnesses. Their daughter, already filming their family outing for social media, pointed her phone at the scene almost automatically. Within seconds, she whispered, "There are like 50 people watching this. She had just created a live, time-stamped record that no one could quietly edit later. Tom crouched near the dropped equipment. "This pistol's a modified airsoft," he said, rolling it with a practiced touch. Safety markings filed off. "These radios are walkie-talkies. No ID numbers on the uniforms." He looked up at the gathered neighbors. "None of this is legitimate. It's all for show." Two joggers arrived, sweat still fresh on their shirts. "We saw that SUV blocking the trail about half an hour ago," one said. "We run this loop every day. It's never parked there before." "Yeah," the other added. "We heard them talking on radios about signal and position. It didn't sound like normal patrol chatter." Mrs. Sinclair appeared next, striding up from her lakeside house, keys and phone in hand. "I watched this entire thing from my living room cameras," she said. "My system covers this section of trail. I've got more than 20 minutes of footage of these two setting up and rehearsing before she even got here." Drake, still on the ground, tried to seize the narrative. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted. "We're contracted security for the HOA. She got combative when we asked her to follow routine procedures." The words sounded weak against the pile of evidence. Sarah Fairmont, a nurse, knelt to check their injuries with brisk, clinical detachment. "No sign of serious trauma," she announced. "Minor abrasions, some bruising, but nothing more." Her response was clearly defensive and proportional. The dispatcher came back over the line. "Deputy Sheriff Garrett is 3 minutes out. Stay clear of the suspects and continue to monitor." Reed's phone buzzed again. More texts from the same contact. "VT." Mrs. Sinclair glanced at her tablet. "They spent several minutes testing gear and going over hand signals," she said. "Then they parked to block the path and waited. This wasn't routine anything. It was an ambush." Distant sirens began to rise. Reed made one last try at intimidation, targeting the crowd. "You people don't understand what you're stepping into," he rasped. "This is coming from your highest community leaders. When the truth comes out, you'll see you're on the wrong side." All he did was confirm what Juliana and I had suspected since the meeting. This wasn't two rogue contractors. This was policy, and now it had witnesses. Deputy Sheriff Garrett arrived like someone who'd been here before, but never quite like this. He pulled up in a marked cruiser, lights flashing, siren off to keep the neighborhood calm. Early 40s, solid build, eyes that had seen every kind of domestic drama a county could produce. He stepped out, taking in the restrained men, scattered gear, and cluster of witnesses. "I'm Deputy Garrett with the County Sheriff's Department," he said. "Who called this in?" "I did," Juliana answered, stepping forward. "I'm the victim and primary witness." In a clean, chronological summary, she walked him through the approach, the fake credentials, the attempted detention, the weapons, and her response. The dispatcher had already heard much of it, but now it went into his notebook and his body cam. Garrett knelt by the equipment. He photographed the pistol, the radios, the uniforms. His expression stayed neutral, but it wasn't hard to read the assessment behind his eyes. "Impersonating law enforcement is a felony," he said, straightening. "Using any kind of weapon, real or not, in an assault only makes it worse." He turned to Reed and Drake and read them their rights with calm finality. The swagger vanished. Without their fake authority, they looked exactly like what they were. Two men in costumes suddenly facing real consequences. "We were hired for security," Drake tried again. "We thought." Garrett held up their IDs. Both had construction licenses. No security certifications. No permits. No nothing. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," he said. "You knew you weren't peace officers." The rail break came when he picked up Reed's still buzzing phone. On the screen, a conversation thread from VT Consulting. "Target compliance must be achieved today per contract specifications. Thornfield en route to assess situation personally." Garrett's brows lifted. He began taking screenshots. "This suggests coordination with a third party directing your actions," he said, more to his recorder than to them. Tom walked over with the small tracker we'd pulled off our car earlier in the week. "Deputy," This was on their victim's vehicle, he said. It's not a toy. This is professional-grade tracking hardware. Mrs. Sinclair queued up footage on her tablet and rotated it so Garrett could see. For nearly half an hour before Juliana arrived, the video showed Reed and Drake adjusting gear, speaking into radios, testing hand signals, and positioning the SUV to block the trail. Then came Juliana's approach. Then the ambush. It demolished any story about spontaneous enforcement. The growl of a high-end engine rolled down the path. A black luxury SUV appeared at the trail's entrance and braked. Reed and Drake stiffened. Vivian Thornfield stepped out. Same immaculate blazer. Same tightly coiled hair. This time she'd brought a lawyer. She took in the flashed lights, the witnesses, the deputy, the two men zip-tied in the dirt. For the first time since I'd known her, her composure cracked a hairline. Deputy, I'm Vivian Thornfield, chairwoman of the Maplewood Estates HOA, she said smoothly, holding out a manicured hand. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding authorized community security operations performed by these contractors under our enhanced patrol program. Her voice was velvet over steel, but Garrett went straight to the point. Ma'am, he said, are you stating that you authorized these individuals to present themselves as law enforcement and detain residents? He let the question hang. Because if so, that places you in a conspiracy to commit assault and impersonation. Her attorney stepped in fast, handing Garrett a sheaf of papers. My client retained VT Consulting LLC for landscaping and community compliance support, he said. Any deviation toward law enforcement activities was outside the scope of their contract. Garrett flipped through the documents. Interesting landscaping services, he said. These contracts reference behavioral modification protocols and resistance management procedures. That aligns a little too neatly with what I'm seeing here. He radioed dispatch, requested additional units, then stepped back to his car to run VT Consulting through the system. The report came back quickly. Owner, Vivian Thornfield. Sole member, sole officer, sole beneficiary. He returned to her with a calm expression and a pair of real handcuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, solicitation of criminal activity, and operating an unlawful security enterprise, he said. You have the right to remain silent. I'd advise you to use it until you can speak to counsel. The click of the cuffs around Vivian's wrists wasn't just the sound of her personal downfall. It was the collapse of her entire enhanced patrol regime. The next 48 hours were a chain reaction. Faced with felony counts and the reality of 3 to 5 years in state prison, Reed and Drake had a choice. Protect Vivian or protect themselves. Their public defenders didn't need long to explain the odds. Drake cracked first. She hired us off Craigslist, he told investigators in a recorded interview. The ad said she needed people comfortable encouraging compliance with HOA rules. She gave us uniforms, fake guns, all that. She had files on people, names, photos, habits. We were supposed to make the problem residents fall in line. Reed's statement was worse. That lady on the trail, he said. She was the fifth. We'd already done 4 others, old folks, young families who kept giving the HOA trouble. She showed us paperwork every time, said it was all legit. We never had badges or anything real. In exchange for full cooperation, restitution, and testimony against Vivian, prosecutors offered both men plea deals. Reduced charges, no prison, but strict conditions. They took them. Vivian's docket, by contrast, looked like a bad novel. Conspiracy to commit assault. Operating an unlicensed security enterprise. Mail fraud, for using official HOA stationery to send fake citations and intimidation letters. Witness tampering. Embezzlement. Once forensic accountants discovered she'd been billing harassment operations as maintenance and funneling HOA funds through VT Consulting. There were also potential federal counts tied to interstate purchases of fake police gear and financial transactions. 3 days after her arrest, the HOA called an emergency meeting. It was standing room only. Anger hummed in the air as residents lined the walls, clutching mailers, photos, and notes from their own run-ins with Vivian's regime. The vote to remove her as chair wasn't close. 78% of Maplewood's homeowners signed the ballot to strip her of all authority. The county paper put her mugshot on the front page under the headline, "Community leader charged in fake police scheme." Phone lines lit up at City Hall. Other neighborhoods started asking uncomfortable questions about their own HOAs. Real estate agents fielded calls from nervous buyers. Property values dipped under the weight of the scandal. Civil attorneys started circling. Within a week, Vivian's husband had filed for legal separation, citing irreconcilable differences and financial risk. VT Consulting was seized and frozen. Her personal accounts were flagged for forfeiture proceedings. And people started talking, like Mrs. Peton, 82, who quietly told investigators that security officers had threatened to fine her over imaginary flower garden regulations. Or the Ashton family, who received mounting fake fees after questioning landscaping expenses and were shadowed by patrol cars just like ours. Juliana did what she does best. She organized. With colleagues from her firm, she created a legal support group for HOA harassment victims. Within weeks, 15 families from Maplewood alone had come forward. Some had only angry letters. Others had surveillance, audio, and citations identical to ours. They weren't isolated incidents. They were chapters in an 18-month campaign. The HOA bylaws were torn down and rebuilt. Transparency requirements. Resident votes on any security measures. Independent oversight committees. Explicit bans on any program resembling law enforcement. Mandatory disclosure of all vendor contracts. Meanwhile, federal investigators followed the money and the mail. They traced purchases of fake uniforms and equipment across state lines, triggering interstate commerce jurisdiction. The IRS reviewed VT Consulting's books and found unreported income, suspicious deductions, and outright fraud. The picture that emerged was simple and damning. Vivian had used the HOA checkbook as her private enforcement budget, then laundered it through her own company. By the time arraignment rolled around, her legal team had run out of spin. The plea offer on the table spared her federal trial, but not prison. In exchange for cooperation, restitution, and a lifetime ban from any role in community governance or security, the minimum included 18 months in federal custody plus supervised release. It was that or roll the dice in front of a jury already saturated with headlines and neighbor testimony. She took the deal. 6 months after sentencing, Maplewood Estates finally looked like the place we thought we were buying into. Judge Martinez's ruling had closed the criminal chapter. 18 months in a minimum security federal facility for Vivian, followed by 2 years of close supervision, a $50,000 fine, and a permanent prohibition from any leadership or security position. Reed and Drake, having kept their end of the plea agreement, each received 24 months of supervised probation, 400 hours of community service focused on elder care and neighborhood safety education, and joint restitution of $50,000 to be paid to victims. Both eventually found legitimate work through reentry programs. They issued public apologies, not scripted dodges, but direct acknowledgments of the damage they'd done. VT Consulting was dissolved. Forensic accountants clawed back nearly $80,000 in misused HOA funds and returned it to Maplewood's budget. Civil settlements with individual victims totaled over $200,000, paid from Thornfield's seized assets and insurance policies. The board held new elections. Residents asked Juliana to run. Her win wasn't just symbolic. It marked a hard pivot from opaque control to open governance. Her first actions as chair: require community votes on any security initiative. Establish independent oversight for all board decisions. Mandate full disclosure and vetting of every vendor contract. Ban any HOA-sponsored activity that even resembled policing. When Maplewood hired actual security again, it was through competitive bidding with licensed companies, verified training, clear insurance, and strict rules against intimidation or impersonation. Property values, after a brief slump, not only recovered but climbed higher than before. What had seemed like a PR disaster became a selling point. A community that had faced its own corruption and rebuilt with transparency as a feature, not a slogan. Juliana's law practice grew too. Word spread that she'd taken down a corrupt HOA from the inside. Homeowners groups and individual residents across the region called for help with their own abusive boards. She began advising on legislative reforms intended to keep HOAs from playing at being governments without accountability. Inside Maplewood, something else changed. Neighbors who'd barely spoken now organized block parties, safety fairs, and town halls. The annual Community Safety Day, held by the lake, turned into both a celebration and a reminder. Rights exist, but only if people are willing to defend them. The victims from Vivian's campaign found ways to turn trauma into action. Mrs. Peton became an outspoken advocate for elderly residents' rights. The Ashtons created a small scholarship for students pursuing civil rights or public interest law. On a broader scale, federal and state regulators used our case as a blueprint. New rules rolled out across multiple states. Clear financial reporting standards for HOAs, resident approval requirements for security spending, background checks for board candidates. The legal precedent from Vivian's conviction became a tool other prosecutors could reach for when community leaders crossed the line into criminality. The Lakeside Trail, the scene of the ambush, changed too. Families picnicked there again. Runners used the path without glancing over their shoulders. The only security vehicles you see now have clear markings and officers who know exactly where their authority starts and stops. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood by the water, watching kids throw bread to ducks while parents talked like they had all the time in the world. The lake mirrored the sky, smooth, bright, untroubled. It also mirrored something else. A neighborhood that had faced what happens when people stop questioning those in power, and what can happen when they start again. Juliana's decision to challenge a slideshow at a boring meeting had exposed a criminal enterprise. Her refusal to yield on that narrow trail had kept a criminal program from disappearing another problem resident into silence. But it wasn't just her. It was Tom with his logistics eye, Sarah with her clinical assessment, Mrs. Sinclair with her cameras, our neighbor's motion sensor, a teenage girl's live stream, a deputy willing to follow a text thread to its source. When people who only want a quiet life decide that quiet isn't worth their dignity, even the most carefully built little kingdoms can fall. Power is supposed to serve, not rule. When it forgets that, ordinary citizens have to remember something else. The Constitution doesn't enforce itself. Rights only exist if we insist on them. In Maplewood Estates, we learned that the hard way. We also learned that justice isn't revenge. It's balance restored, protection for the vulnerable, guardrails around those who govern, and systems designed to keep the same abuse from happening again. The lake still reflects the clubhouse and the sky. Now, it also reflects a community that understands vigilance, unity, and participation aren't optional extras. They're the price of living free. You've just heard another story from Echo Stories, where we follow the moments when ordinary people find the nerve and the know-how to stand up to corruption and reclaim their peace. If this story of HOA overreach, community courage, and real accountability resonated with you, tap that like button and share it with someone who's fighting their own version of this battle. And tell us in the comments, how far has your HOA crossed the line? Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay strong. We'll see you in the next video.